I go to a 24-hour gym located in a nearby strip mall. My friend manages the place, and I help out with different jobs since he hooks me up with a cheaper membership. On Christmas Eve, I went in for a late-night workout before making the hour-long drive to my parents' house for the holidays. He mentioned they needed someone to take out the day's trash since most of his staff had taken time off. The gym stays pretty empty late at night, but I figured it would give me a chance to avoid the holiday traffic on my drive home. The parking lot was completely empty and covered in snow when I finished my workout around 11 p.m. My friend had showed me earlier that the dumpster was behind the building, stuck in this cramped, weird area that was blocked off by these tall, concrete walls. I spotted someone digging through the trash. He must have heard me approaching as he looked up at me. He looked pretty normal, wearing regular clothes and everything, but something felt really off. He told me he lost his phone in the trash and asked if I could help look for it. Every part of me knew something was wrong. I stepped back, telling him I just needed to dump these bags and leave. He kept trying to make conversation, acting overly friendly. He nodded and said I should just leave the bags and he'd throw them in after finding his phone. His fake friendliness made me uneasy. I rushed back inside, grabbed my stuff from my locker, and walked to my car. The lot only had 2 other vehicles now, one being this black Ford F-150 with some custom decals, parked a few spots from mine. The truck was running with its lights off, but the windows were super dark, and I couldn't see who was inside. I kept glancing at it while I walked, making sure to remember what it looked like. I got in my car fast and locked up. I called my parents while pulling out of the lot, letting them know I was finally heading their way and needed to get gas and food first. The closest gas station was just before the highway entrance. The gas station was empty except for the worker inside the store. I pulled up to a pump and paid with my card. While I was pumping gas, the black F-150 pulled into the lot. It parked at a pump on the opposite side, but nobody got out. The truck just sat there with the engine running. I watched it in my car window's reflection while finishing up. When I got back to my car, the black truck still hadn't moved. It was just sitting at the pump, engine on, not getting any gas. I pulled out of the station, and the truck left right after me, still not getting gas. It followed me onto the highway, staying a few cars back. I changed lanes a couple of times to check if it was really following. Each time I switched lanes, it did the same thing. I started looking for somewhere to stop that would have people around. That's when I saw a 24-hour diner. The black F-150 didn't follow me into the parking lot, just drove on by. I felt relieved thinking that the ordeal was over. The place was quiet when I walked in. Just one customer sat at the counter, and the cook was in the kitchen. I ordered my food and waited. After grabbing my food, I turned to head to a bench seat when something outside caught my eye. Through the front windows, I saw the same guy from the dumpster leaning against a black F-150 parked next to my car. He must have circled back while I was waiting for my food, and I hadn't noticed him pull in. The other customer must have seen how scared I looked. He turned on his stool and asked if I was okay. I made up some excuse about being worried about ice in the lot, asking if he'd mind walking me to my car when I left. He agreed right away, probably seeing how nervous I looked. I was pretty freaked out. While I ate, I kept checking to see if he was still there. He was. When it was time to go, the other customer walked me out to my car. The dumpster guy didn't even look over as we walked out together. He just stayed there, pretending to mess with something on his phone. It was only about a 20-minute drive left to home. Then, on the way, I noticed a vehicle in my mirror. I couldn't make out any other details in the dark, just that the vehicle's headlights were off. The vehicle stayed right behind me through every turn. When we passed under a streetlight, I saw it clear as day. The same black F-150 with the same custom decals. I called 911 and told the dispatcher everything. She stayed super calm and said to drive straight to the nearest police station, telling me they'd have someone ready outside. I kept her on the phone the whole time, taking turns I didn't need to just to make sure this guy was really following me. The F-150 stayed right on my tail until I pulled into the police station. It drove right past without slowing down. A cop car went after him, but all they could do was give him a ticket for driving without lights. The guy driving matched exactly how I described the dumpster creep. I never found out what he planned to do, and thankfully haven't seen him since. I told my friend at the gym what happened, and he didn't believe me until he saw the initial encounter on the security footage. That was by far the scariest drive to my parents' house. Back in December of 2015, I was 18 years old and living with my folks in Anchorage, Alaska. Throughout high school, I got really into mountain biking. I spent most of my free time riding trails, even in winter using my fat tire bike. I didn't have a driver's license yet, so biking was my only way to get around when weather allowed it. One night during my senior year, everything changed. I was at my girlfriend's house while her parents were out. The main road from her place to mine was about 4 miles, but cutting through Kincaid Park made it only about 2.5 miles. It was getting late, around 10:15 p.m., and I was beat from hanging out all evening. I picked the shorter route home. The park trails got pretty empty and dark in winter, but I'd ridden through there plenty of times before at night, both in summer and winter. I had a powerful helmet-mounted light, so seeing in the dark wasn't a problem for me. Summer usually brought lots of people to the park, but winter turned it into something completely different. The trails felt empty and weird with nobody around. The snow made everything silent, which made it worse. At about 10:25, I turned off the lit street onto the snowy park trail. The trails were well packed from daytime riders, but completely empty now. I knew the ride would take roughly 15 minutes. About halfway through the dark section, I reached a spot where 2 trails crossed. I spotted 2 guys on bikes wearing black hooded jackets coming down the connecting trail. They had only basic dim lights on their bikes, just enough to see the trail. As our paths met at the intersection, I gave a quick wave and looked briefly at them in my light. I heard them talking quietly to each other, then they split up at the crossing, one continuing ahead on my trail while the other turned behind me. Out of nowhere, one guy skidded his bike sideways to block the trail ahead. I stopped hard in the snow. When I turned around, I saw the other guy stopped behind me, holding a knife and laughing. The guy in front got off his bike, pulled out a knife too, and then came at me. The blade looked wet in my light. He grabbed my jacket and slammed me down into the snow. I was friggin' terrified. This guy was about to stab me while his friend just sat there laughing. Realizing I was probably about to die, I grabbed a handful of snow and threw it straight in his face, then kicked his legs out from under him. He went down hard, his knife flying off somewhere into the snow. I jumped up fast, got back on my bike, and saw a side trail that led to the lit road. The guy tried to grab at my foot from the ground, but missed. I pedaled hard through the deep snow, hearing them yelling behind me. I rode as fast as I could toward the lights of the busy road ahead. When I got there, I crossed to the other side of the road and kept watching. The guys came out of the park a minute later, but went the opposite direction, like nothing had happened. My panic began to ease as they disappeared down the street, but I stayed put, keeping an eye on them to make sure they didn't turn back. My phone showed 10:50 p.m. The whole thing left me shaking. I biked home fast, getting there in about 5 minutes. I kept quiet about what happened, not because I'd get in trouble, but because I didn't want to think about it again or lose my freedom to ride. After a few days, the memory of almost getting killed in that empty park started to fade. I avoided those trails at night and stayed away completely for several months. The next morning brought some scary news that shook our whole area. There had been a violent stabbing just a block from my girlfriend's house. Someone got killed after a drug deal turned bad. 2 guys were involved in the attack, and the victim bled out before help arrived. The whole thing happened right around the time I left my girlfriend's place. The suspects matched the exact descriptions of the guys I met in the park. Despite being just 19 years old, they looked way older. The police caught them pretty quick since lots of people in the area knew who they were. I've gotten into fights before and taken some beatings, but nothing ever scared me like that night. Those guys were probably running away from the stabbing when I ran into them on the trail. The whole thing still makes me feel sick when I think about how close I came to becoming their second victim that night. It was January, back in 2018. I was staying at a winter cabin near a snowshoeing trail. It was a very basic, stripped-down cabin with only the bare necessities. My boyfriend Todd usually joined me on these trips, and this time was no different, since going alone never felt right in such a remote spot. I had mapped out 3 days there with no other plans except exploring the snowy trails. On the first day when we arrived, we put our stuff in the cabin and settled in, making some hot chocolate and chilling by the fireplace for the rest of the afternoon. This cabin was only small. It had a single room, the bed, fireplace, and everything else were all in one space. We dozed off early and got up at 8 a.m. to check out the trail. After strapping on our snowshoes, we started the 10-minute trek from the cabin down a short forested path that was completely buried in snow. Once we reached the main trail, we found a good route and kept going, using our poles to steady ourselves. I found it really energizing to push through the deep snow, and the workout always cleared my head, though some people think winter hiking is crazy. We'd been on the trail for about 2 hours when we decided to turn back, as the snow was getting heavier and the wind was picking up speed. We were following our tracks back to the cabin path when I spotted another set of snowshoe tracks in the snow parallel to ours. They followed our route up to about 100 yards behind the furthest point where we'd gone, then turned off in the direction of the woods. As far as I could tell, they continued deep beyond the tree line. We weren't sure if someone had been out here following us, but the tracks next to ours made us worried enough that we decided to follow them to see where they came from. During our walk back, we heard movement in the woods next to the trail, on the side of the trail where the tracks had previously led to. The sounds matched our pace and stopped whenever we stopped moving. The tracks mostly followed the path we took, going straight back to the cabin, stopping nearby the front door. We weren't completely sure if whoever they were following us back through the woods, or if there was another explanation for the sounds. Either way, the sounds staying parallel to us the whole way back made us walk back faster. My boyfriend went into the cabin first, to make sure it was safe and that there was no intruder. We noticed no obvious footprints leading into the cabin, which provided some relief. The cabin didn't have any lock on the door, which now seemed like a major problem. Feeling somewhat uneasy, we pushed the wardrobe in front of the door before warming up by the fireplace. My boyfriend noticed one of the windows was ever so slightly open, maybe an inch or even less. Very easy to miss it. We weren't sure if we'd left it like that or if someone had messed with it, but we shut it and locked it quickly, feeling even more uneasy. There was nothing else out here for miles from what we knew about, so anyone being out here seemed kind of strange, especially in the winter. We cooked dinner and stayed in the cabin for the rest of the night, keeping the fireplace going and mostly just reading. A couple of hours after sunset, we heard movement outside, a very soft crunching in the snow, but in the clear pattern of someone walking. We turned off the interior cabin lights so we could see better outside. My boyfriend went over to the window and looked, immediately mentioning that he saw a figure out by the trees walking toward the path. They were wearing what looked like white winter camouflage that made them nearly invisible in the dark. He could only spot them when they moved, with the help of the moonlight. Once they got to the path, they turned and came straight for the front door. The door handle started turning, and they tried to push it open, but the wardrobe held it shut. We yelled out, asking what they wanted and saying we were armed. We weren't. For a second, it got quiet, and we thought they might have left. Then we heard their footsteps moving around the side of the cabin, heading straight for the window that had been slightly open earlier. I saw their eyes staring right back at me through the window. I jumped away, now standing a few feet back, as the person quickly tried to open it. They looked frustrated, like they'd expected it to be already open. I grabbed my trekking pole, ready to use it as a weapon, if need be, while Todd called the police. But after a few more tries, the person ran off. We watched their figure vanish into the snowy woods, going in the same direction we'd heard them come from. After that, we grabbed our stuff and ran to the car, leaving the area only a couple of minutes later. We never learned who they were or what they wanted, but they knew we were staying there and deliberately came back in the middle of the night to try and break in.